Hello everyone and welcome back to our reading of Vampires. Today we ask the question, how were vampires destroyed? Let's find out. The people of each region of Europe have their own version of how to destroy a vampire. In some accounts, vampires are destroyed when someone drives a stake through its heart. There are also versions in which a specific type of wood is needed. In Romania, only a hawthorn stake cannot be pulled out by the vampire. In other versions, the stake could be a red-hot iron poker. In some versions, the vampire's head must be removed and placed between the knees of the corpse. Other accounts calling for the decapitation and the stake. In Romania, people may insert forks in the eyes of the dead person who is thought to be a vampire. Gypsies of Eastern Europe believe that a long pole thrust into the ground above the coffin is sufficient. If a vampire should try to leave its grave, he or she would be impaled by the pole. This method eliminates the need to exhume the body. In different accounts, the head, heart, or entire body is burned. This may be in addition to staking. After cremation, the ashes are carefully reburied, or sometimes they are strewn in a river, because some people believe that vampires cannot cross running water. Why were there so many ways to destroy a vampire? The answer seems to be in the very nature of folklore. Many people contributed ideas on how to kill a vampire, some of which stuck after they were tried and found to work. Preventing vampires' progress. As a general rule, cremation of the entire body is the surest means of finally ending the vampire's career. As one reads the case studies of reputed vampires, it is obvious that all other measures merely prevent the vampire from leaving the grave, or render the vampire harmless if it does exist. These methods do not destroy the vampire. Vampires are sometimes buried face downward at a crossroad, for example. If a vampire is buried face down, its efforts to dig its way out will only put it deeper in the ground. If it does manage to reverse direction, leaves the grave, and finds itself at a crossroad, the vampire will then encounter the difficulty of selecting a direction. A vampire may be buried with its mouth stuffed with garlic, nails, or thorns to prevent its biting someone. Sometimes the grave site is strung around with thorny bushes to snag the vampire's clothing, thus slowing it down when it tries to leave the grave. A cross may be placed upon the grave to prevent its exit. Often, millet or corn is scattered over the suspected vampire's body. Popular legend maintains that the vampire must eat and or count every grain before it can exit its coffin. These methods prevent the vampire's progress, but do not destroy it. But if cremation kills a vampire, why were these other efforts made? Why did people not exhume the body or discover it by day in its coffin and burn it? The answer seems to be that total cremation is not as easy as it seems. The amount of wood or other fuel required is immense and costly, about 1,500 pounds of coal. The fire must reach and stay at 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 hour. the body must be wrapped in animal fat to promote burning. Complete destruction of a body is difficult to achieve. Lee's other steps designed to hamper the activities of vampires are much less expensive. 2 case studies reported by Agnes Mercochi in 1927 describe other ways to ward off a vampire. According to Mercochi's report, in 1899, in a village of Romania, old Mrs. Gheorghita died. After a few months, her grandchildren began to die one by one. Her sons, full of local superstition about the undead, dug up her body, cut it in two, and reburied it. Still, other relatives died. Again, they exhumed her body and found it still intact. This time, they removed her heart, which bled freely. They cut it in 4 pieces and burned it on hot cinders. They mixed the ashes and water and made the remaining children drink the mixture. This ended the mysterious deaths. After this incident, it was believed that drinking water plus the ashes of a vampire would eliminate the vampire. An undated account describes the plight of a man from Transylvania named Dumitriu Vedinu. Each of his children died shortly after birth. Certain that it was the doing of a vampire, he and his neighbors decided to take a white horse from the cemetery and lead it over the graves of his wife's relations. Sure enough, the horse refused to step over the grave of Jonah Marta, the wife's mother. It stood there, neighing and snorting and beating its hooves. When they removed Jonah's body, she sat straight up as if alive. Dumitriu ended the nightmare of the dying infants by burning his wife's mother. Vampire beliefs persist. In 1940, Gordon Cooper wrote a book about burial practices around the world. It was entitled, "I Searched the World for Death." In it he relates how he was invited to witness a Bulgarian ceremony known as the Second Burial. This ritual is still performed today to prevent the deceased from becoming a vampire. Cooper's host told him that 5 years ago a man had died during the unclean days when the world is ruled by the forces of evil. The deceased himself had made his family promise him this second burial. It was, in any case, a fairly common ritual. As evening approached, everybody went to the churchyard. The sexton sprinkled holy water on each member of the group. Men and women divided into groups on either side of the grave. The priest appeared with a cross, a lighted candle, and a spade. After a prayer, the grave was opened. It was just an overgrown mound and a wooden cross. The bones were lifted out and placed on a sheet. After more prayers, the bones and skull were washed with wine and put into a bag. Oil and wine were poured into the grave. The bones were replaced and the grave was refilled. No one needed to fear this poor soul. He would not become a vampire. In his book, The Burial Rituals of Rural Greece, Loring Danforth relates that in present-day Greece, examination and reburial of the dead is the usual custom after a prescribed number of years. In fact, graves are rented for the period and normally are not family-owned. After unearthing, the family and friends ritually cleanse the bones, recite prayers, and collect the bones in a clean sack. In the second burial, then they placed the sack in the common mortuary house at one end of the cemetery. The whole procedure is based on a confused set of religious and superstitious ideas that date back to the folklore of the Greek Orthodox tradition, likely formed during the times of the Black Death. The most important element in the ritual is surely the need to observe the body, to ensure that it is properly decomposing and is not a vampire. In Romania too, the second burial is a common practice in many districts. Another account of Greek beliefs comes from an interview Cooper had with a Greek American in 1934. They say that once a Vikolakis married and even begot 2 children, but every Saturday his wife would miss him. Once at a party, people noticed that his singing voice sounded like that of a man who had died. So the villagers made plans, because we are told that the Vikolakis does not come out on Saturday. They opened the grave of the man who had died and found the husband inside. He begged for mercy, not to be burned, but they showed him no mercy. These accounts prevent some of the reasons for the widespread belief in vampires, and this belief reaches into the 20th century. What do these anecdotes mean? Why do they exist? What type of phenomena are they describing? There are many possibilities. Well, that's very interesting, isn't it? And I apologize for having to say the word gypsies. I know being 100 years old and all, I should be used to saying it, but the fact is that word is no longer acceptable. And I always like to stay up to date with the times. And really, that's all for today. I'll see you next time. See ya!